Steve Harvey never imagined that a regular episode of his daytime talk show would turn into a moment that would haunt him, heal him, and humble him all at once. The studio was buzzing, the audience laughing, the lights shining in carefully choreographed directions as Steve stood on stage, holding his signature smile, ready to introduce a segment that had been mysteriously labeled A Voice from Africa. No one had told him much, just that someone special had sent a message to him directly, and that it would be played live. The producer, a slim woman named Corinne, had whispered to him before the show, "Steve, this one's different. Trust me." He trusted her, but he didn't understand what she meant until the screen behind him flickered to life, and the face of Ibrahim Traoré, the young president of Burkina Faso, appeared, calm, steady, and somehow burning with something deeper than words could explain. The studio fell utterly silent. Even the house band stopped mid-riff, sensing a gravity that defied their cues. Steve turned around slowly, a slight laugh on his lips out of habit, but as Ibrahim began to speak, everything changed. "Steve Harvey," Ibrahim said with a voice full of dignity and pain, "I greet you not as a leader of a distant land, but as your brother. I speak not to entertain your audience, but to remind them that we, the children of Africa, and you, the children of those who were taken, are still one family, still suffering, still rising." The words struck like thunder, but it was the way he spoke, slow, intentional, like each syllable carried centuries of weight, that began to crush Steve's smile into something far more raw. Ibrahim continued, "I know your laughter has healed many wounds, and your wisdom has lifted many heads. But I ask you today not to entertain, but to feel. For we, your brothers and sisters in Africa, are still bleeding from wounds they said would heal with time." The audience was frozen, some already wiping away tears. But Steve just stared, lips parted, heart racing, because he knew what Ibrahim was saying wasn't just political, it was personal. "They took millions from our shores," Ibrahim said, "and those millions built empires with broken backs. Today, the world sees you in suits, on stages, in films. But they do not see the chains that still rattle behind your laughter. The systems, the poverty, the silence." And now Steve's eyes were shimmering because those chains weren't theoretical. He'd felt them every time a white executive questioned his worth, every time a joke had to be edited out because it made the wrong audience uncomfortable, every time his success was called luck rather than legacy. "But Steve," Ibrahim's voice grew more tender now, "you are not just a host, you are a bridge. And today I speak to the black man who survived America, survived self-doubt, survived silence. And I ask you to use that bridge not for ratings, but for truth. Tell them what's happening in Congo, in Sudan, in Burkina Faso. Tell them about the foreign hands stealing gold and the Western soldiers training rebels while pretending to offer aid. Tell them how black boys are still being hunted in your streets and how our girls are still being stolen from villages in the dark. Tell them not because it's trending, but because it's family." Steve's shoulders were trembling now, his hand clutching the armrest of the couch beside him, as if anchoring himself to reality. The screen went black for a moment, and then returned to Ibrahim's face, now closer, eyes piercing through the studio like a blade of truth. "Do not cry for us," Ibrahim whispered. "Stand with us." And then the message ended. For a moment, there was only the humming silence of a room full of people forgetting how to breathe. Steve didn't move, didn't speak, his eyes glassy, his lips slightly quivering, until finally, with a rawness that bypassed his stage persona, he muttered, "My God." And then he wept. Not softly, not theatrically, but deeply, like a man whose soul had just been reintroduced to itself. The audience didn't applaud. They couldn't. It would have been sacrilege. Instead, they sat with him as tears streamed down his face, the tears of a man whose smile had always been armor, now shattered by the truth of his own bloodline. And when Steve finally lifted his head, voice hoarse, he said, "We gon' talk about this, not just today, not just here, but everywhere I go." And he meant it, Behind the cameras, Corinne wiped her face and whispered to the crew, "Cut to commercial." But none of them moved, as if even technology knew to stand still in the face of ancestral pain. And far away in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim sat alone, watching the broadcast on a small screen, his hand over his heart as the voice of his brother reached him. Not through microphones, but through the echo of shared suffering. The next day, the world awoke to a different kind of headline. Not the usual noise of celebrity gossip or political scandal, but a still image of Steve Harvey mid-tear, his face vulnerable and undone, under a caption that simply read, "A message from Africa broke. Steve Harvey on Live TV." And from that moment, the silence between Black America and the motherland began to shake as something deeper than awareness took root: remembrance. Steve didn't return to his show the next morning. Instead, he sat in his dressing room staring at the screen on which Ibrahim's message had played again and again throughout the night. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. All he could do was feel and remember. Remember the first time he'd been called boy by a white studio executive who smiled while saying it. Remember the first time a teacher told him he was too loud, too black, too poor to matter. Remember the pain in his mother's eyes when they were evicted, the humiliation of having to pretend everything was fine when they had nothing, the quiet understanding between him and other Black kids that they would always have to be twice as good to be seen as half as worthy. But now, in this moment, what haunted him wasn't just his own pain. It was the ocean between him and Ibrahim, an ocean made not of water, but of bodies, of stories lost, of mothers whose sons vanished into ships, of daughters never kissed goodnight again because they were sold beneath lantern light like cattle. He thought of the way African children still carried buckets on their heads while the West drank from diamond-encrusted glasses, the way American Black boys were shot holding Skittles or cell phones while their killers went home to sleep in peace, the way the world cheered when Black athletes won medals, but stayed quiet when those same men were choked in broad daylight. Steve stood up, pulled on a dark suit, and walked out of the studio not to a set but to the streets. He had called Ibrahim that morning, his voice cracking as he said, "Brother, I heard you." And they had spoken for hours about history, betrayal, colonization, and above all, unity. Now Steve was walking into a gathering organized in Harlem where hundreds of people, Black men, women, elders, youth, had assembled in silence, holding signs that bore the names of forgotten places: Ouagadougou, Bamako, Kinshasa, Accra, Ferguson, Flint, Tulsa, Soweto, Gaza. Yes, Gaza too, because Steve had come to see that oppression was not local, it was global. And wherever Black or brown skin bled unjustly, the wound was shared. The crowd parted when he arrived, not with cheers but with respect, as if a father had returned home after years at war. Steve took the mic, not as a host, not as a star, but as a man stripped of pretense. His voice was rough, tired, trembling as he said, "I got a message yesterday from a brother who ain't never been to this country, but knows our pain like it's in his blood, because it is." And then he told them what Ibrahim had said, every word, every syllable, as tears flowed freely from the people before him. Elders sobbing into scarves, teenagers gripping each other like lifelines, mothers whispering prayers in Yoruba, Swahili, Zulu, English, French. He paused, then added, "I was raised to think Africa was a place of famine, flies, and failure. But they lied. They lied because they feared what we'd become if we ever knew the truth. And the truth he now knew was that the same powers that had chained their ancestors were still chaining their minds. Through media, through debt, through fear, through division." Steve closed his eyes and said, "They separated us by an ocean, but we still cry the same tears." And somewhere in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim stood barefoot in a village where French soldiers had once built checkpoints, now abandoned, speaking to his own people. He told them about Steve, about the tears of a man they had only seen in comedy shows and motivational clips, about the crack that had opened in the wall of silence. "Our brother is awake," he told them, "and he is not alone." Then as the sun fell behind the baobab trees, Ibrahim sat beneath a wooden cross carved with names of those who resisted colonization and prayed, not for power, not for revenge, but for unity. Back in Harlem, a young boy handed Steve a folded piece of paper that read, "Why do they hate us?" And Steve could barely keep from collapsing as he held that child, his own grandchild's age, and whispered, "They don't hate us because of what we've done. They hate us because of what we've survived." And that night, on every Black-owned radio station, every podcast, every church and corner, people spoke not just of justice, but of healing, of reconnecting the diaspora, of building something no empire could burn down again. Steve ended the night not in front of a camera, but at a community kitchen, serving food beside elders and gang survivors. Because for once, he didn't want to be watched. He wanted to serve. Weeks had passed since that broadcast that broke the internet, but mended a wound too long ignored, and Steve Harvey was no longer just a talk show host or a comedian or a motivational speaker. He had become something else entirely, a messenger between continents, a voice summoned by pain, and above all, a man who finally knew the full weight of his purpose. The world had responded in waves, emails, letters, videos from Black youth in Detroit, Lagos, Kingston, Johannesburg, Port-au-Prince, London, and Atlanta, all saying the same thing in different accents. "Thank you for speaking for us." Steve had visited schools, prisons, refugee camps, and even United Nations backrooms, not as a guest, but as a man on a mission, carrying with him the words of Ibrahim Traoré like scripture written on his heart. And then one morning a call came, not from a news station or a talk show producer, but from Ibrahim himself, calm and resolute, asking Steve to come to Burkina Faso and walk the land with him, to touch the soil their shared ancestors had once bled into, to speak not just to the people but with them. Steve hesitated for only a moment, not out of fear, but out of reverence, because something in him knew this was not just a visit. It was a return. The plane ride was long and quiet, his thoughts heavy, but when he stepped off the aircraft and felt the heat and dust of the African sun wrap around him like an ancient embrace, he wept. Not tears of sadness this time, but of recognition. A crowd had gathered, elders, children, women in vibrant wraps, men with drums, all waiting to greet the man who had cried on TV but stood tall in his soul. Ibrahim approached with no guards, no ceremony, only a quiet smile and open arms, and when they embraced, the earth beneath them seemed to exhale. Over the next days, Steve was taken to places few outsiders had seen. Gold mines where children worked for crumbs under foreign flags, villages where elders remembered the day colonizers carved borders with knives instead of maps, fields where revolutionary leaders were buried without names. Steve walked with them, sat with them, listened without speaking, and with every story his heart cracked further open until the pressure of centuries became a single, overwhelming truth. Our pain is shared, and so must be our healing. One night under a sky so full of stars, it looked like a ceiling of ancestors watching, Steve stood before a gathering of thousands. Farmers, artists, freedom fighters, mothers and orphans, and he spoke without script or camera, just his heart saying, "I've told jokes for decades, but tonight I got no jokes left, only truth. We were stolen, yes. We were scattered. We were lied to, made to hate each other, made to think we were less, made to forget where we came from and who we are, but no more." His voice cracked, but he did not stop. "You are not my past. You are my present. Your fight is my fight. Your future is my legacy." The crowd rose in silence, then in tears, and then in song, not rehearsed but primal, an old song sung by freed slaves and freedom warriors alike, a song without lyrics but full of soul. And Steve stood in the middle of it all, hands lifted, eyes closed, finally home not in geography but in spirit. In the days that followed, he and Ibrahim launched an initiative called Bridge of Black Light, a movement to connect diasporas through education, agriculture, media, and shared culture. Not charity, but collaboration. Steve gave up endorsements, cut ties with networks that silenced Black truth, and poured his wealth into building media that told the real stories of Toussaint, Sankara, Harriet, Lumumba, Marcus Garvey, Fela, Malcolm, Nina Simone, all the ones whitewashed from textbooks but tattooed into the DNA of a people who had survived the impossible. Soon, murals began appearing across cities. New York, Accra, Paris, Nairobi, LA, all showing a single image, a broken chain melting into a microphone held by a hand that reached for the sun. School kids in Baltimore began learning African history before American history, and when asked why, one little girl simply said, "Because that's where we started." Steve returned to America changed, not softer but sharper, not quieter but deeper, and everywhere he went, from jails to boardrooms. He carried a photo of him and Ibrahim standing beneath the baobab tree where revolutionaries once planned rebellion, and he'd say, "They thought they broke us, but we're still here, still speaking, still rising." In one final episode of his show, its last before he retired the format, Steve invited Black voices from across the world, a Congolese doctor healing war survivors, a Jamaican poet reclaiming ancestral dialects, a Chicago teen rebuilding his block one garden at a time, and finally a live call from Ibrahim, who said simply, "We are no longer scattered stars. We are a constellation."